Hello, I want to welcome everyone to the Power of Our Story. This right here is our first responder coffee and conversation group, all of whom have gone through trauma and have hit that day and have found their way to healing. To all of you protectors, we don't want you to struggle for years, suffering in silence and confusion. Anyone who is watching this, you are welcome to come to our group. This is our tribe. This is our family. This is a place to process the journey that you've been going through with others that get it. So here is the question for our storytellers tonight. If you knew what you know now, what advice would you give your younger self? We hope that through their stories, you will understand your own story better and know that you are not alone. So let's start tonight's talk with Daniel Torres. Daniel?
Yes, hello. My name is Daniel Torres. I currently work for the Arizona Department of Corrections in Phoenix, Arizona. Retired Army military police officer, former federal law enforcement officer, and did some other stuff in safety and security. My job at the time when that day hit was a freshly minted, highly motivated young military police officer in the United States Army. And I had been on patrol probably for a few months at my first duty station, which was Fort Hood, Texas. Had my trusty .45 caliber pistol and my leather U.S. cavalry holster. I was on patrol, solo patrol, and I responded to a medical emergency. And I was responding in conjunction with the fire department on base or on post, because at the time we were having some attacks on our first responders, our fire personnel. So they would not respond unless there was military police as well. So I get to the location in the housing area before the fire department, and I go inside, and it's a young mother screaming about her baby, you know, help my baby, save my baby. And I noticed this young girl at the time. I didn't realize how old she was. But she looked fairly small and frail. And there was a distinct smell when I got in there and got close to the young lady. And based on my training and, you know, being a trained observer, I pretty much could sense that the young girl had already expired. But because of what the mother was asking me to do to help save her baby, I removed the young child from the couch, put her on the floor, which was carpeted, and started performing CPR. While I was performing CPR, it was evident that this young child had already expired. But there was this distinct smell that I remember, and it took me back, you know, a little bit of the backstory. It took me back to the day that my father passed away. He died from cancer, and he died about 3 weeks before I left for basic training. And when I found him in the bedroom, he had passed away at home overnight. It was this distinct smell of death, and especially from a disease that's eating, you know, your body alive from the inside. So I remember the smell from the day my dad died, and, you know, I never really processed that. Joined the Army, going through training, and I remember when I was helping this young mother at Fort Hood, my drill sergeants, you know, drilled it into us that, you know, you can't show emotion, you know, you can't let things get to you. You got to have thick skin to be a good MP. So I took that to heart, because at the time I was already pretty good at compartmentalizing my emotions because I never really processed or properly grieved my dad's death. You know, so fast forward to, you know, performing CPR, and this young child had that familiar smell, and it took me back to the day, you know, my dad passed away. So I continued doing CPR. The fire department finally shows up. They come in and they look at me like, you know, what are you doing? And I looked at the mother. I think they understood what was going on. So they actually took over CPR, conducted all life, you know, saving measures, transported the young child And while they were doing their thing, I was talking with the mother. She went from, save my baby to thank you, for helping my baby and saving my baby. So I finished, clear the scene, fire department transports. I go back to the MP station, do my report. And of course, at the time, there was no debrief. There was no, SISM. There wasn't even a, hey, troop, do you need to talk to anybody about that? It's a pretty messed up scene. It was good job, get back out on patrol. I was like, okay, cool. So that's what I did, doing that for a few more months. And I was still having some issues processing my dad's death and just doing, patrol and seeing things, different types of incidents, critical incidents. So I finally reached out to go to the chaplain because being raised Roman Catholic, I felt who better to help me than a chaplain. So I go to the chaplain, pour out my heart, say, I don't know what's going on. I need some help. Gives me a flyer, says, read this and come back, see me if you need help. I said, cool. So I do that for about 3-4 more months and I'm still, conflicted. And I feel, well, let me go back to the chaplain. Chaplain sees me, doesn't remember me. I pour out my heart to him again. And this time at least gave me a book, it was a hardcover book, on properly grieving loss of a loved one. So that set my trajectory right there as a young trooper to suppress my emotions, especially responding to critical incidents and traumatic events. And the advice I would like to give my younger self then was, even if you do reach out for help and you don't get the help you need, continue to reach out for help. Somebody will listen. And also I would tell myself to not ignore or miss, but more so ignore the red flags and the red warnings of drinking, smoking, and doing high risk behaviors, because that was just reacting negatively to the traumas I experienced and not responding appropriately. Thank you.
Daniel, thank you so much for sharing your story. And, it is interesting. We're hearing this more and more, that whatever childhood trauma we don't resolve, many times later in life, especially with veterans and first responders, with all that trauma, it goes back to the same area of the brain. And so I appreciate your advice about just keep seeking help, keep finding somebody who will listen.
Absolutely.
So, yeah, I appreciate that so much, Daniel. Thank you so much. Okay, the next storyteller is Todd Stewart.
Hello, my name is Todd Stewart. I'm currently a community crisis chaplain. Many moons ago, I was a young gung-ho firefighter back in Washington State. That day was sort of an accumulation of several days that led up to one big one. The first day was only about 2 months after I joined the department, rolling up on a suicide kid that was less than a year younger than I was, and encountering his mother as she came out to meet us as the engine rolled up to the scene. And probably one of the next big ones was an accident on Interstate 5. Drunk driver crossed the median, smashed into a young family of 3. And when we rolled up there, mom and dad were gone, and their 6-year-old daughter was in the back seat, and she was still alive. But by the time we got the hearse tool out and we cut the roof off and we finally got to her, she was gone. So there were a lot of things filling my trauma bucket by the time I responded on a house fire in the Camelot neighborhood. And we were the second engine in, and it was a fire that came up out from the back of the house. What we didn't realize is, and I was on the second hose team to go up the stairs, way up the stairs, the stairway collapsed. And I was hung up on my air pack and my armpits. And My brothers came out onto that collapsed staircase and saved my life. But that injury ended my career. And I was completely lost. And I spent the next 30 years struggling with PTSD and depression and anxiety. I survived barely a suicide attempt and really suffered until just a couple of years ago when I got the help I needed. So with all that, the experience I would give my rookie self is this. You have to accept now that you won't be able to save everyone. You have to let go of the ones you can't save. If you don't, they'll haunt you forever. This will be especially true of the little ones. Watching a child die will eat your guts out. It's okay to grieve, but in doing so, you have to give them over to God's care and give yourself the peace of knowing you did all you could. A firefighter is not who you are. It's what you do. And you do what you do because of who you are. The day is going to come when your career ends, maybe a lot sooner than you planned. And when that happens, you have to recognize that you have an identity outside of the fire service. If you don't, you will be lost. You're going to experience some really horrible shit, not just the blood, trauma, and death. What will really mess you up is knowing that a lot of that blood, trauma, and death is the result of a broken humanity. People who purposely hurt and kill others, people whose brains decide it's okay to set fire to an occupied building, shoot a gun into a crowd, or drive drunk, wipe out an entire family, or beat a baby to death. You're going to get some hard lessons on how effed up people are. You could lose a brother or sister in the line of duty, a unique and devastating heartbreak. Do not think you can just forget this stuff, because you can't. When you experience trauma, talk it out with someone you trust. If there is one, get into a CSM program and use it. If there's a chaplain, seek them out. If those things aren't there, find out ahead of time where you can go to get the help you need, putting the trauma behind you in a healthy way. If you don't, this will eat you alive. You have chosen the best job in the entire world. Your family just got a hell of a lot bigger. You get to save lives, push yourself to your physical and mental limit, and yes, be admired for what you do. Enjoy it, rookie, but never neglect to take care of yourself. If you do that, you should have a long and satisfying career.
Todd, thank you so much. Thank you for sharing your story. So what I heard you say is that it's very important to let go of the ones that you couldn't save. I also heard you say that your identity is, it's not the job you do, it's who you are. And that's important to know. And then also when you do experience trauma, make sure you find someone you can talk to. So Todd, thank you so much for sharing. So our next storyteller is Janet.
Hi, everyone. My name is Janet Wizawati, and I can't really pinpoint when that day came, but my situation's a bit unique. I was a police officer's spouse before I was a civilian member with the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. One of the first things that I remember as a spouse, my husband calling me one day and saying, it was night, kids were in bed, and said, do you know so-and-so? And I says, well, I don't know him, but I know his wife. I said, why? Oh, he was killed tonight. Bye. And hung up. And it's like, okay, what just happened? Our families, our children, our spouses, and even sometimes our friends get vicarious trauma through our experiences that we don't realize when we share. And we don't have to share details. They can feel it. I can remember an officer one day telling me that his daughter said, when he came home from work, says, hey, what'd you do today, Dad? And he says, oh, I had a couple B&Es. And she says, what's a B&E? And he says, a break and enter. Well, she wouldn't go to sleep that night. because she thought that they were going to get broken into. Takes me back to we raised our grandchildren, and our grandson was in kindergarten, and they taught him about fires, and you got to go, make a plan. He wouldn't go to sleep at night until we put a smoke detector in his bedroom. Vicarious trauma happens. As a civilian member, as a police dispatcher, there's a different kind of trauma that happens. We don't see what our callers are going through. We don't see what our members are going through. What we do experience is what goes on in our head, because when there's a void, we make up our own pictures and from what we're feeling with them. And when we're not in control, like if an officer doesn't answer and he's gone into a situation, like I can remember one of my officers saying, yeah, we're just, we heard something. I didn't check on him. He didn't tell me where he was going. And he says, we're just going to go and check on somebody. Came in at the office and asked us to go check on somebody. And so I'm just going to knock on the door and check on them. Next thing I hear, he says, gun. And he said he opened the door and this guy turned around with a rifle right face into him. Like, I'm on the other end of that. He's in an isolated place where there's only 2 members, and the only way to get help for him is to fly in. And who knows when that would be. We don't know what happens to us. I had so many health issues. I didn't even know that until many, many years later that it could be pinpointed back to different traumas. A young police officer I was very close to that committed suicide. And I talked to him about 6 months before. I knew why he did it, because he shared with me after a file on how he couldn't rationalize a murder-suicide in his head. And 6 months later, he shot himself. And to a little girl calling in the middle of the night because her mom was being beat up by a boyfriend. She's the same age as my 7-year-old granddaughter that's home snug in bed. And all I can think of is this poor little girl going to school the next day, maybe in my granddaughter's class, thinking, the teacher's going to yell at her because she's not paying attention, because she can't. Her head's back at home, listening to what happened last night. She probably didn't sleep all night. Vicarious trauma happens. And what happened to me was all of a sudden one day, and it also goes back to, we had 4 members ambushed and killed that I worked with. We had one of our dogmen shot. Now, I wasn't there. I wasn't working when that happened, but I knew them and I had worked with them. And so I ended up having a bad car accident. And then all of this stuff came up, because when we can keep busy, because we have to at our job, you push everything down and you can't do your job if you're emotional. So what happened, I was injured enough that I couldn't do anything. So I always say, God made me sit in my you-know-what, and everything came up. Everything came up. I found myself crying in the middle of the night, wishing I died in that car accident. And I knew I needed help. And I found it. Not the first psychologist. Believe me, don't ever work with somebody you don't feel comfortable with. Ever. Keep looking. Like Daniel said, keep looking. I found a psychologist to work with. She was amazing, gave me wonderful tools. I thought everything was car accident. She says, first session, nothing to do with car accident, everything to do with your job. And so what I want to say to you, pay attention to your health, because it might not be what you think. And pay attention to the fact that, you know what, it's okay to ask for help. And those psychologists, some of them might not be for you, but there is somebody for you. And there's groups like this, and there's people like us that are willing to share our story, because we know we've been there and we're here for you. So don't ever think you're alone.
Janet, thank you so much for sharing your story. What I heard you say is you're talking about the vicarious trauma about, even family members, and, you can feel it even if it's not said, because trauma does show itself in different ways. I think about the quote by Richard Rohr that said, if we do not deal with our trauma, we are bound to transmit it. And if that can be a way that, we take the trauma seriously, not just for ourselves, but for our loved ones. You know, you're only human. You're only human. It's a natural response to abnormal conditions. It's okay. You're not weak. It is human. Another thing that I heard you and Daniel both say is just how important that debriefing is, which it sounds like it doesn't happen a lot. But if these situations had a time of really having a debriefing time with, you know, the people in the agency, or like you said, someone who you trust. And just like Janet said, it may not be the first therapist, and don't feel like you're stuck and don't feel like they're all like that. You just find the right fit and really deal with that and heal. So I just thank you so much, Janet, for sharing your story. Very powerful. Thank you so much. Okay, so the next storyteller is Sarah Marie.
Hi, everyone. Sarah Marie. I've been a nurse for 16 years. I've worked in various hospital systems and outpatient and home care. And so, the first thing I want to share is actually a quote from my dad. My dad passed away in 2000 when I was 18. He was a lieutenant colonel in the Air Force, a rocket scientist. So lots of wisdom and very practical wisdom. But I've kept it. I have it actually here on a little card. So he says, guess what? When it comes right down to it, wherever you go, there you are. Whatever you do, that's what you've done. Whatever you're thinking, that's what's controlling your mind. Whatever has happened has happened. The most important thing now is, how will you handle it? In other words, what will you do next? Past experience, both yours and others, can help to answer the question. That's 1995, so that's before I graduated high school. So I had, you know, that bit of wisdom kind of going into nursing and into my profession. And so I definitely wanted to share that because that really set me up, I think, for us for when the traumas did occur. And so for me, one of the most vivid traumas I have a memory of is about 6 months after becoming a new nurse. This was right when like electronic charting came out. And I ended up giving a medication to a patient who was allergic to that medication because the system didn't flag it and didn't know and didn't match up. And she went into cardiac arrest. We had to code her. She needed to be intubated, go to the ICU. I was a wreck. That was like on a Friday. So I had the weekend off and I was a wreck going in to that weekend, because as a nurse, like, it's do no harm. You know, we take that oath, and to think that I could have possibly given this medication to this person that did them harm was a really, really, you know, tough swallow for me. And so I came back to work on Monday, and kind of the go-getter in me, and going back to this statement of like learning from your past experiences, you know, I really kind of gathered a team of people around me and kind of said, let's figure out, you know, what went wrong. Why did this happen? And so there's going to be times in your career when things are going to happen, and you need to get that team together and reflect on that. And learn from that. And sometimes that's not always the case, because going into nursing before I had graduated, I had heard the term, and I've heard it several times over my 16-year career. Nurses throw their youngs to the wolves. And you wouldn't think that in a profession where you're caring for people and doing that, that would be the case. But I keep seeing it time and time again. And even now, like on LinkedIn, they call it like that incivility. And so there's definitely some tension in the nursing community, especially like if you get outside traveling nurses coming, they're not always welcomed in. And it's really difficult. And so before I graduated nursing school, that was one of the promises that I made to myself, that I was going to create a team. I was going to create a team and not throw anyone to the wolves, because no one deserves to be thrown to the wolves, especially in this profession. We're here to help people, help them heal, help them grow. And that was just not a culture that I wanted to have around me and experience. And so I was really fortunate to be in some really wonderful positions and work in some really wonderful hospitals where that wasn't always the case. And if it was, I stood up and we addressed that. And so my piece of advice towards that, if that's something that you are experiencing, definitely, seek out help and seek out somebody, to help you. And if you can't find the help, go get another job, because there's so many nursing jobs out there. You have the pick. You can do that, and you can choose, where you want to work. And then just real quick, kind of the last story I have is there was an incident with one of my patients. It was my first day taking care of him, but I had helped him to the restroom the day before and had noticed some changes. And I called up the attending physician and letting the attending physician know that something just wasn't right. This isn't typical symptoms for this patient. And the physician argued with me. And finally, I put my foot down, and he was like, fine, whatever, order the neuro consult. So originally this doctor told me that his symptoms were due to DTs, detoxing from alcohol, and ordered the neuro consult, took the guy down to the CAT scan, and turned out he had this huge cancer growing on his spinal cord. And so my second piece of advice would be, find your voice. Don't be afraid to advocate for yourself, and don't be afraid to advocate for your patients. Trust your gut. If you have a gut instinct, bring it up and voice it over and over again, because I'd much rather be wrong and not have it go that way, instead of having to say I was right and I wish you would have listened to me.
Oh, Sarah Marie, thank you so much for sharing. And what I heard you say is, I love your dad's advice. Bottom line, how will you handle it? That is great. And I love how you were proactive too. Just in really getting a team together to learn, like, what happened that last time, which really sounds like you followed your dad's advice. How will I handle it when that day or that moment comes? And to find your voice, isn't that powerful? To find your voice and to not live with regrets, it sounds like, thank you, Sarah Marie. That was powerful. I appreciate it. So the next person to share is Michelle Franklin.
Hi, everybody. I'm Michelle. I have been a dispatcher for just under 15 years. During that time, I've been a trainer, a supervisor, did every opportunity that I was presented at the few departments that I worked at. My day that hit was November 3rd of 2020. I was working an overtime shift as a supervisor with my current department. And as a supervisor, I also had to answer phone calls. So I answered a 911 call. A neighbor in an apartment complex had she had heard gunshots, went out, and the apartment next to her, she found a female subject down, gunshot wound to the head. And she heard another female yelling for help inside the apartment. She asked me if she should go inside to see what was going on. I, give the safety protocol we're supposed to give, because I can't tell her to go inside. And next thing she says is she's inside, and she found another female down, already deceased, or what appeared to be deceased from gunshot wound, and a 16-year-old female yelling for help who had a gunshot wound to her abdominal area and was bleeding out. So I gave instructions for controlled bleeding, gave instructions to start CPR on the other female, go through all that protocol, get everybody started that way. Since I was a supervisor on, one of the other call takers came over and said, Michelle, I need you to jump on my line. So I jumped on her line, and she was on the line with the suspect who had just killed everybody. And he had taken the 12-year-old little boy from the apartment and was holding him hostage inside the vehicle. We were instructed not to talk by the suspect, otherwise he said he would shoot the boy. And so we had to just listen for 36 minutes as he tortured this little boy, made him do things that no child should ever have to be subject to. And there was nothing that we could do. The officers on scene finally located him inside the vehicle with the little boy. And unfortunately, it ended with him shooting the boy while we were both still on the line listening to him. After his celebratory war cry of shooting the little boy, we then heard the shootout go down with the officer shooting at the vehicle. I went home from that overtime shift without ever getting any closure about whether or not, I knew in my gut that the boy was dead, but I didn't know for sure. We had no confirmation of that over the radio, over the phone, nothing. I had no information if the suspect was dead. I didn't find out anything until about 4 hours later when I finally went to the debrief from the fire department, because the police department didn't invite their dispatchers to debriefs. So I went to the fire department. I thought I was okay. I ended up going out on a mandatory leave for 3 weeks and seeing a psychiatrist. I said, I'm fine, get me back to work. Get back to work. And for 2 months, I had more trauma hit me. And then finally had a coworker say, you're not good and you need help. So if you don't go talk to our managers, I'm going to do it for you. I went and talked to our administrator. I broke down crying, which was a huge thing for me because, you don't cry in law enforcement. So she understood the reality of it, but she didn't really have a lot of options. So I ended up going out on leave under FMLA and actually used my own time. I thought it'd be back by the end of the month. It's going on a year and a half later. And I did finally file for workers' comp. So I'm at least out under that, thanks to the state law that was passed in Nevada for dispatchers. But going back through all this, I can look back and see myself go through the nightmares, the depression, the vicarious trauma that my 3-year-old daughter ended up having from her end of things. The isolation. I went through every symptom you can imagine with PTSD. I'm still struggling with a lot of symptoms from PTSD. But if I could go back, one of the things that I would tell my younger self, and that I would give any advice to anybody else who's coming into the field, is to get to know your resources. My department my administrator didn't know what to do with me. One of the guys in charge of the employee program said, he called me, he's like, I don't want to put this in text, but you should talk to this lawyer for workers' comp. Well, I got more information and resources from my workers' comp lawyer than I did from anybody else. And I don't think that's right. I think you should get to know your resources from your department because there's so much out there. The other thing that I recommend is befriending your chaplain with your fire department. I got to know one of my good friends is a chaplain, and she was able to offer a type of support that was very different than the law enforcement resources I was using. And my very last piece of advice is something that I learned from attending this group, The Power of Our Story. I knew I wanted to help people. I thought being a dispatcher or first responder was the only way to do that. And I have learned, and I would love to make sure everyone else knows too, that being a first responder is not the only way to help people. This group, all of these people with the nonprofits and the other companies that are out there have shown me that there are so many other ways to help people. So I just need to find where my next calling is.
Michelle, thank you so much for sharing your story. It's hard to imagine for anybody who's not a first responder or a veteran, living these lives. I think it's just so important for us as civilians to hear your stories, to really be here to support you and protect you. So I just thank you all just for having courage. We have another storyteller, but what I heard from you, Michelle, big thing is get to know your resources. And also to befriend the chaplain, which sounds like it's in the fire department from what I'm hearing you say. Okay. And then that the desire to help people doesn't mean you have to be a dispatcher or a first responder. That is who you are, helping people. And there's many ways to be able to find jobs that fit with who you are. So again, Michelle, thank you so much for sharing your story. So now we will go to Chris Chandler Yates to finish off our storytelling for the night, and then hang in there because we'll have a conversation afterward.
Awesome. Thanks, Sarah. Yeah, so I'm Chris Chandler Yates, originally from California, but I've been in New Zealand since the end of 2004. My day is a multitude, and it wasn't any one given day, but it kind of slowly crept up. I joined the police in 2011 after a 2-year, I call it a fight to get in because it was a lot of waiting. But I joined, and I hadn't even finished our police college here, we call it, or academy, and call it as well, and went to a guy who had been dead 3 weeks. So we did a station duty halfway through, and so went to a guy who had been dead 3 weeks, was as black as the screen on your phone when it's locked. And if you are aware of what happens to a body after 3 weeks, it's not very nice. And then went and just laughed it off and ate rice that night for dinner, and yeah. And I can see some of you guys laughing, you know what I'm talking about. And so, over the years, saw trauma, coming out of police college and academy, went to a guy who had jumped in front of a train, and again, saw that trauma. At the time, didn't think anything of it, just thought, it's, this is fine. It's just another dead body. Fast forward, and it does creep up, and you start to shove things away and start to lose who you are. And then I had a big incident for me. We went to go arrest somebody from a domestic at a different house, and the guy went to go try to escape and evade arrest, and he punched my female partner that I had in the side of the face, dented her cheek, and then took off out the door. I chased him, caught him, took everything in my power not to lay into him, which I'm very glad that I didn't that day. But that changed me that day. So that was one of those days that I just was, it completely went against everything that I had in my body to see a female get assaulted like that. Now, no officer should get assaulted like that, but she left the job shortly thereafter. And I never got a debrief really after that. I got back to the station completely, really destroyed inside, but just as most law enforcement, and first responders, just shoved it away and went, nah, I'm good. My boss was pretty good my sergeant was pretty good at the time, told me to go. He's like, Chris, go have a coffee or a cup of tea. And we were on a late shift, so finishing at 2 a.m. It was about midnight at this point. And so I went into the meal room and I went, what am I doing in here? And so I just walked back into the muster room and just started doing the paperwork. Didn't get home till 7 a.m. that morning. Got home. My wife was calling me because I was riding my mountain bike to work at the time. And got home and sat on the back steps and just bawled my eyes out. And that was the only emotion I showed around it. And then I shut myself back up again and carried on with the job. And so then went off and did some traffic work for a year. Was actually quite good on a good team. And then came back and started going to suicides. I had 4 suicides and 4 notification jobs in a matter of 3 weeks. And two of those jobs were, 2 of them were, couldn't get away with waiting for the mental health or the health team, the guys who help out with those advising or notification jobs. And so I had to tell them. So watching somebody my dad's age at the time collapse to his knees because his son took his own life. And I had to tell him. Watching a lady whose husband, who she was going through a divorce, but had to tell her that her husband passed away, and she knew instantly that he had taken his own life. She couldn't even dial a telephone to call her friends to come over. And so seeing those, they just don't leave. And then her 16-year-old daughter coming down and finding the suicide note on the computer and then disappearing, and me just wanting to give her a big hug, saying it's not your fault when she was blaming herself. It all sticks with you. And then fast forward a few years and I'm on diplomatic protection. So I'm looking after diplomats, looked after now President Biden when he was vice president, when he came over here. So doing bodyguard work, and found myself extremely burned out, high alertness, coming back to the US, thinking that cars are following me, so much so that I pulled over one incident. And so I was completely drained, completely gone. All the trauma was built up so much that I thought that what I needed to do was run away from everything. And so I ended up almost self-sabotaging my entire life, my entire relationship, almost cheated on my wife, told her I wanted a divorce, I'm done, I'm out. And luckily we went to counseling. She got me to go to counseling for the second time in my career. And again, this feeds off of what so many people have said tonight, is that if the first one you don't click with it or you don't feel like it's going well, get a different one. And this time, which was a couple years after the first time of going to counseling, she saved our relationship. She saved my life, everything, because I was doing stupid things on my motorcycle just to feel emotions. And so I took time out to find myself, and now I coach people through this burnout and that, which serves, again, as Michelle said, serves, that greater purpose of what I am. I help people be seen and create less pain. So what I would tell my younger self is get rid of the ego. You're going to need help. I told myself in the very beginning, no, I'll be fine. My mom was worried I'd become a cynical, hard cop. And guess what? I became a cynical, hard cop. Because my ego got in the way of, no, I'll be fine, I'll talk about it. Well, one, talk about it, but two, debrief. I know we've heard tonight a couple times, debrief. I feel is the number one thing, because you build that connection, that rapport, like we have here at Power of Our Story, where we can talk to each other. Debrief thing, some people are still active, so they come in and they tell us what's going on, because we can understand it. And then that way, you can actually just get it off your chest and live those, feel those emotions and that, because at times you can't show them when you're on the street, but you do need to connect back to them. And the biggest thing that I've learned is know who you are, not what you do, but know who you are. And I've helped some people here and that really recognize that, but knowing who you are, I am somebody who helps people be seen, helps people create less pain in their lives. And that's who I am. So it's not what you do, it's who you are. Truly, they can really help you move through that trauma and also not burn out in the end, because the trauma does it. So thanks again, Sarah. And appreciate all of you guys.
Oof, I have to catch my breath here. All these stories. Oh my gosh. I just want to thank you all so much for your courage to just put it out there and really share what advice you would give to your younger self and all those who are still in the field. So Chris, all the multiple traumas you've gone through, and again, no real debrief, no real debrief in the department. Sound like you had a kind, senior, but still no real debrief.
No, they didn't know how.
They didn't know how. They didn't have those tools yet. And just the conclusion that you came to, how important it is to really know who you are. It's not what you do, but to really know who you are, which brought you then to what you're doing now. And that's coaching to help other people to know who they are. So I just want to thank everybody so much. I'm going to put the screen to gallery so we can see everybody and have a conversation. Your story, seriously, as civilians, we never get this side. We don't hear this side about what nurses can go through, or dispatchers, or police officers, or firefighters, correctional officers. We don't hear these stories. And I think we owe it to you also to hear these stories. I think these stories are not only good for people who are in the field now to get great advice from you all, but I think also to make that bridge to the civilian population to protect our protectors. to really support our protectors. So again, thank you all. I want to open it up now for comments and questions. What if Oh, go ahead.
I guess the only comment I have is thanks everybody for sharing and for always holding that space in here. I come and go in and out of here, but I always feel like it could be 2 months that I haven't been here, and all of a sudden, it's as if no time has passed at all, and yet I've never met any of you in person. So it's pretty cool.
It's amazing how you can really build relationships even on Zoom. I mean, we have definitely found that. Anybody else?
I have to agree
One
too.
One comment for Chris. You're surrounded by my relatives, my friend. I happen to have 1,500 living relatives in New Zealand and about 80 in Australia. And some are Maori, most are Caucasian, and some have come to visit me. One of these days, I'm going to get down there to visit them. But in the meantime, just know that you're surrounded.
Thanks, Paul.
Thanks, Paul.
That's neither good or bad. It's just there.
Well, if you do come visit, please let me know so I can show you around as well.
I appreciate that. Thank you, sir.
Michelle, you had something to say?
Yeah, I kind of wanted to go off of what Chris said too, because this is a group where I've never met any of you guys in person, but you guys are the first ones. Last week was my first time talking about some detail, a little bit of what I went through, and then this week too. But the support that we have from this group is just amazing to me. And I feel more comfortable talking to people in this group than I do with some of the people that are here in person. So this group has just really been a lot of healing things for me.
I'm so happy to hear that, Michelle. I mean, you are definitely loved, and it's amazing. We actually got together in person. Chris and Natalie were there, and Chris Gregorio came down, and Paul was there, and then we had Papa Ron from another group, and we had Anthony, who used to come and moved on, but is still part of it. And it is like this initial, you get to give them a big hug in person, and then you go on being great friends that you already have built. I mean, it is truly amazing. So, Michelle, I can't wait till I can give you a big hug, and I'm sure everybody else feels that way too. That is going to be a great day. Yeah. Thanks, Michelle. Anybody? Oh, Todd, you got your hand up.
Yeah, I think, one of the common themes that I heard from pretty much everybody's story was the lack of critical incident stress management. I joined the department, the fire department, in 1982, and the sum total of critical incident stress management back then was suck it up. I remember my lieutenant specifically when it was after that suicide call, and I was really struggling with it hard. I mean, the kid could have been in my high school class. And he basically said, yeah, you just got to get past it because the next call is on its way and you got to be ready for it. And in my my first classes in dealing with the CISM, you've got the big T trauma. You've got incidents like that. You've got incidents like that little girl in the car accident. And then that starts to fill your bucket up. And then you've got that little trauma. And that's just the crap that you deal with every time you're on shift. The little things that happen almost every time you're on duty. And pretty soon that bucket gets more and more full. And that's, I think that's one reason why we all gather here as a tribe, because even those things that happened 10, 20, for me, 30 years ago, you still, if you haven't processed those things, you've got to get them out, and you've got to get them out with somebody that you trust. And that's why I decided to become a trauma chaplain, because when I finally, I call it when I reached my equinox, when I realized that I was living as much in the light as I was in the dark. I also had a realization that there were a lot of my brothers and sisters that were still, walking through hell in a gasoline jacket, and that they needed help. And that's one reason why I just absolutely love this tribe here, because it is honestly part of my therapy. And not only do we reach out to each other, but I think that a lot of us are motivated to change the culture in these agencies. We all know that if we don't start building resilient cops and resilient firefighters who know how to deal with these things, that we're just going to see more and more cops and firefighters and dispatchers and nurses dying by their own hand. I mean, even with the all of the violence against officers right now, there's still almost twice as many cops that die by their own hand as they do in the line of duty. And that's another tragedy, is that they don't consider those deaths as a line of duty death. And that's why I say I'm a PTSI survivor, post-traumatic stress injury, and not disorder, because it is an injury and it's a result of your duty, and it should be treated like that.
Wow, so beautifully said, Todd. I really appreciate that. And I appreciate what you're doing, just being so proactive and being a trauma chaplain. And I think, just like what you said too, this is the hope for even recording this, is to get these in the agencies, get these in the departments, get these, get this before people who are serving right now, so they don't have to suffer in silence for years and confusion and everything that comes with it. So yeah, thank you. So well said. Who else has a question or comment?
Yeah, I just want to, piggyback saying, this tribe is great. And I'm glad that Kim gave me Sarah's name.
Yes.
Somebody I met at a conference, a correctional association conference, hooked me up with Sarah's name, and been here, tried to be pretty consistent. My lovely wife's a mental health professional, and she calls what we're doing, sharing our story. I guess it's an actual narrative therapy. Sharing your story is helping others, but it's also helping ourselves. And I get that, I really do. But because of the connections, created with this tribe, and just doing some other stuff on my own, I got my first mental health intake with a mental health provider next week. And it's hopeful. I'm hopeful that it'll help me address that unresolved grief about my dad's death, which happened in 1985. So it's never too late. And just because I had a knucklehead chaplain, everyone's talking good stuff about chaplains. I had a knucklehead chaplain back in the day. Doesn't mean that all chaplains are bad.
Sometimes we don't know what we don't know, huh?
Right.
Yeah, it is. I love the point about even just the group too. And that, we really do heal in healthy community. Like, I can't imagine this tribe without any of you. You all add something so different and so special, and have such great input that it is very special. Thanks, Daniel. Chris, did you have something to say? You were unmuted, or Paul? I don't want to put you on the spot if you didn't.
I have something to share briefly.
Yes.
And this piggybacks on some of the comments that have been made by others, and particularly Chris. Sarah, you have provided a place where there is an implied covenant of good faith and fair dealing which means that people can come here and tell their stories and know that they're never going to leave the room. And that has incredible value and provides incredible freedom to people to just be who they are. And to tell it like they see it, tell it like they remember it, tell it like they heard it, tell it like they smelled it, and tell it like they touched it. And if that doesn't hit all the senses, I don't know what I'm missing, but the point is that you have provided that. And I think that to a person in here, they would agree that there is an implied covenant. And that is what provides the safety to say what's on your mind and not have to apologize for it or have to justify it later on.
Thank you so much, Paul. I appreciate you sharing that. I really do think that people being vulnerable, there's something so sacred about that, that it takes the ultimate protectiveness, to be part of the healing and re-empowering people and helping people get back to who they really are, to get their confidence back. And so I appreciate that. But, I'll tell you, this would not be happening if it weren't for all of you. It's definitely a team effort. So thank you, Paul. Thanks so much.
I think it was Perez who called you Mama Bear.
Oh,
I think that fits.
It went from supervision at the beginning from Dave Weiner to Mama Bear. I think I like that one better. Thank you. Oh, that's great. Anybody else have any comments, or how do you feel after sharing your story on a recorded session? How do you feel about that?
I know, I feel more relieved. I feel like I sounded a little bit better this week with it being my second time telling my story, or a little bit of it, but I know I felt relief.
Oh, that's great. Okay.
Yeah, it's good. And I wanted to say to Sarah Marie too, that I appreciate from the nurses' point of coming on too and getting that out there. A lot of people don't realize how much a nurses go through. And I watched my mom do an 18-year career as a nurse, and she did a lot of her nursing in the prison system towards the end of the career. And when you talk about eating their own, man, they really eat their own.
Yeah, and that's funny because I'm actually going to a position to work in the jail system here in the next month or so. But thank you. But one of the biggest things I kept hearing was that debrief, and as nurses, you don't get that debrief. If your patient crashes, whatever, you get them stabilized, you do that, and then you have 4 other patients that you have to go take care of. There's none of that downtime. And it's really concerning because I've seen a lot more nurse suicide going on, and that usually wasn't a thing. But I think it was either last week or 2 weeks ago, a nurse killed himself in the store in the supply room in his ER. And so it's really concerning because there's a different side to nursing that is really kind of being seen, I think, especially after COVID. And so I appreciate you guys, because you guys are my debriefing session, and being able to do that. And it's that community. So if you're not finding it within your profession, it's out there. It's in places like this, with Sarah and the Power of Our Story, or, other various things that some nurses are starting groups and things like that. Police officers, fire department. There's a lot of, those professionals that have moved out of it that now realize and recognize the need for people to be able to connect and share those stories and do that debriefing. So I appreciate you guys kind of welcoming me into the group and being able to share my story. So,
bring other nurses with you, because they too will want to share their stories at some point, and that is an excellent way to do that. And I would just encourage it. I've spent a lot of time in ERs, usually with somebody in custody, but I got to tell you, the place is a nightmare most of the time. And no matter how big the hospital is, no matter how little it is, it's a nightmare all the time. And you know, and I say that because I've taken people into custody and taken them down to County USC to the jail ward. And guys that were hopped up on every kind of drug you can imagine, trying to kick the windows out of the police car. And so I had the dispatcher call ahead and tell them that we were coming. And these 6 of the biggest, burliest deputy sheriffs you ever saw in your life, each one of them had a neck bigger than my thighs. And they just came out and they opened the back doors, and one pushed and the other pulled, and out the guy went. And he went in and started giving the nurse some garbage. And they just took him down to the deck and put their boot in the middle of his back and said, okay, you can talk to her from here. And, you know, unfortunately, that's the way it has to be with people that literally are just out of their gourds. And so, and the same thing goes for Michelle as well. The inability to have a visual on what's going on, even though you're hearing it all in your ears and you're speaking it, you don't really see who might be coming up behind that officer trying to do him in, because he's taking the officer's taking his wife into custody, or whatever the situation may be, vice versa. And so you too, I would invite you to bring fellow dispatchers in, even from other agencies. Just, it doesn't matter where they come from. They all have the problems if they've been around for any length of time at all. And again, the ability to tell your story and know that you're never going to have to apologize for it is really important to anybody. And you're not going to be judged for it.
Yeah.
And, you know, that's truly the end of the story. You're just simply never going to be judged, no matter what you say.
Thank you, Paul. That is so powerful. You know, I think about that, like you said, just, you know, about the nurses. We haven't really had a lot of nurses on. And I don't think, you know, unless you are in that field, you always think of nurses as caretakers, and to think that it's so vicious. And I am actually, like, I'm floored that you, being so new, you even had the courage to create that team to really think about what happened. Like, that is really courageous. I just have to commend you for that. That is, to be in a kind of a place where it feels very unsafe and people are a bit wolfy, or, you know, and to have the courage to do that, that is quite amazing. So thank you for being so open and honest too about that happening. You know, it really does help others heal the more vulnerable we are with our stories. So you guys have been incredible, just amazing. And now we'll have all the police officers as a group speak in the next recording. Does anybody else have any comments? I don't want to shut anybody down.
I was just going to piggyback on kind of the, you know, nurses throw their youngs to the wolves thing, and creating that team, you know, and we've brought up our faith, and I'm a Christian as well. When you shine light in that darkness, you're going to bring people to the light. And I think that was really kind of my main motivator, is if I create these teams and create the safety and create that culture where no, we're not going to do that, people are going to gravitate and pull towards that, and we'll move away from that culture than we will like embody it. And so I really definitely noticed that, you know, kind of taking that stance. And so I hope that's encouragement to somebody, like, if you're facing that, fighting against that, and really kind of creating that culture where no, we don't act like that and we don't behave like that. other people can't help but just be drawn to it and back you up.
Other people will be embarrassed if they're not drawn to it.
Yeah. Love that. So well said, Sarah Marie. Beautifully said. So anyway, last call for a comment before I close this out here.
Chris, it's your turn to talk.
Talking to me?
He's putting you on the spot, not me this time.
Yeah, I see. No, it's awesome to be here. Unfortunately, I'm in Phoenix. Natalie's at home by herself, which I hate, but I tried to get on earlier. I was trying to get on, but I just wasn't able to get on quickly enough, so I missed a lot of the good stuff. But hearing similar stories again is always just awesome. It's just awesome, and being a part of the, Natalie and I talk about this a lot where, we can't really choose our family, but with you guys, we can choose our family, and we all want to be here. And it's just amazing to share the stories and, accept each other for everything that we are, and everything you've gone through and everything else. And like Paul says, for no judgment whatsoever, so, because I think we all understand we've been through some stuff, and you know what, it's not easy, and to be able to talk about it's even less easy. So it's a pretty big deal. So
yeah, thank you so much. And I'm really looking forward also to hearing our law enforcement officer friends tell their story in a couple weeks. So we'll have another recording like this. But yeah, thank you so much, Chris. Well, listen, were you going to say something, Todd?
No. Other than just declaring the shit magnet wisdom.
Thank you, Chris.
I want to comment briefly that I enjoyed having dinner with Natalie the other night.
Oh,
I really did. I just thought that was really cool. And my wife enjoyed it all. And I thank you for putting it on. I know it took a lot of work to put that all together. It's like herding cats, but you got it all together. And I appreciate it very much. And it was nice to meet Chris and Chris Gregorio as well. We didn't have much time to talk, but we felt like we knew each other forever. So
that was
we loved meeting
you
too,
good.
Paul.
I'm sorry.
We loved meeting you too, Paul. It was nice to sit around a table. It was like Thanksgiving with your family. It's kind of cool.
It was, wasn't it?
Yeah.
It really was.
That was fun. At first, I thought you had dinner with Natalie. I thought, oh my gosh, that's so sweet. But you're talking about the big get together with Chris. Yeah, that was
a week ago.
Fun. Yeah, that was really
How
fun.
soon do we forget?
I just heard Natalie. I'm like, oh, that's so cool. No, that's great. Well, listen, I have lots of love for you guys. Thank you so much for your courage and just who you are. And I look forward to seeing you next week. Thanks for everything.
Thank you.